because they haven't been able to afford them that protection because they were too short-sighted and too big-headed not to do it.
Call Carol Beaumont.
Mr Chair, I rise to speak to the Child and Family Protection Bill, and can I acknowledge the contribution of all my colleagues. I think what we have done is put this in an important context and looked at some of the history. But as you say, Mr Chair, we need to focus on the bill here, and I intend to do that and look at some of the main provisions of the bill. It's got three parts which amend respectively the Domestic Violence Act 1995, the Care of Children Act 2004 and the Adoption Act 1955. Before I look at those, some of those changes, I do want to note that I want to add my voice in saying that there is not much, if anything, that can be more important than the protection of children. That as politicians, that must surely be something that we have an absolute responsibility for, to make sure that those who don't have their own voice or access to services in the way that adults do are appropriately cared for. And when I made my maiden speech in this House, I undertook to say that I would always stand up and speak out against family and domestic violence, and that I would work to seek improvements in this area. And in my working life, I've had quite a bit to do with both women and children who have been subject to violence from other members of their family. And I can say that the importance of this cannot be overstated. It's not only the terrible statistics we have in terms of children being killed or physically injured, it is the psychological damage that it makes, or it causes on children to see one of their parents, usually their mother, being subject to violence, or indeed being subject to that sort of violence and fear themselves, and the ongoing consequences of that on people's lives. So I just am putting it in that context to say this is a very serious matter indeed, and if there are things we can do as a House to strengthen this bill, we should. We should. And so two of my colleagues have put up supplementary order papers to try and improve this bill. I would urge those opposite to look at them. I would also add my voice to the fact that Labor's domestic violence reform bill has been languishing at the bottom of the order paper, and in fact was a bill that was already there and ready to go, which meant we could have had change in this area much more rapidly than we have had. And I raised this issue with the Minister, with Simon Power, when he came before our Select Committee on the estimates, and was told that the rest of the changes in that bill are too expensive to make. Well, I think this is a priority for government expenditure. Working in this area must be a priority. So this bill, going back to the bill, intends to provide more protection for children who are victims of domestic violence, and to ensure that family courts can manage concurrent proceedings involving children appropriately and reduce administrative barriers to court processes. And as the Honourable Ruth Dyson said, there are good suggestions in this bill, and there are specific changes which will make a difference. So there's no question about that, and that is why Labor is supporting this bill, as we will support any attempt to prevent and mitigate the harm of domestic violence. But it's not ambitious enough, and it should. We could have done this much more quickly, as Sue Moroney has said, and we should have used the Labor's domestic violence reform bill, which was already in place. Now, some of the statistics that sit around this, well, in 2008, police responded to 82,692 incidents involving some form of domestic violence. Now, most of those cases will have involved children. Our domestic violence rates don't compare well with other OECD countries, and we have the worst child death by maltreatment rate in the developed world. And can I put on record in debating this bill that it is an absolute scandal that funding for residential care in our refuges has been cut under this government. It's an absolute scandal. At a time when rates of domestic violence are going up, and generally the refuges are the place that women will go with their children in seeking safety, we have less funding for residential refuge care. That is an absolute outrage. Specific provisions that I wanted to look at were the provisions around the Care of Children Act 2004, clauses 17 to 28, Mr Chair. Clauses 17 to 28 of this bill amend the Care of Children Act 2004, and the bill provides that where a protection order has been made against a party to an application for a parenting order, the court may only make an order allowing the party day-to-day care or contact with the child if the court is satisfied that the child will be safe. That's absolutely critically important. If the court is not satisfied the child will be safe, it may make an order for supervised contact between the child and the party. Now, one of the things that I think is particularly important, and I referred to earlier, and one of the things I'm strongly supportive of in this bill, is that the procedures used in the Care of Children hearings are extended to allegations of psychological abuse as well as physical abuse. We all know that in situations of family violence, the psychological damage, as I said earlier, is hugely significant. This is about people who are meant to be part of those that love and care for you. And whether it's violence directed towards yourself or towards your mother or other member of your family, the psychological damage and abuse that can occur in family violence situations is very severe and can be highly problematic for people going through the rest of their lives. So the fact that procedures used in the Care of Children hearings are extended to allegations of psychological abuse, I think is very important, and I certainly applaud that change. The bill also strengthens the protection for children from unlawful removal from New Zealand, and I think many of us will be aware that there are situations, especially now that people are more mobile, and because people live in many different places and migrate between countries, that this is much more of an issue than perhaps it was in the past. And both the amendments to the Care of Children Act in providing protection for unlawful removal from New Zealand, but also the amendments in Part 3 of the Adoption Act 1955, which also make some changes in relation to this issue of international movement of children, is, I think, also worthy of note. Can I say that we do think that the government should be doing more in this area? As I've said, the cuts to funding of refuges should be something that members opposite are raising with their own ministerial colleagues, but also the remainder of the recommendations in Labour's Domestic Violence Reform Bill could still be prioritised by this government, should still be prioritised by this government. Now, Simon Power has said that he intends to progress the remaining provisions, but when will that happen? Simon Power is intending to do quite a few things, and as Ms Moroney has said, there are very few sitting days left, really, before the election, and this is a shame that this has come to us so late in the parliamentary term, and here we are in the committee stage, as Ms Moroney said. So I just again reiterate Labour's support for the bill, our support for the two supplementary order papers, and urge those opposite to consider them seriously, to at least strengthen the bill as far as you can within the confines of the remaining sitting time by agreeing to those two supplementary order papers in the name of Lynn Pillay and Jacinda Ardern, respectively. Thank you.
Call Dr. Regine.